Very warm and cheerful welcome to all our distinguished participants, respected dignitaries, and esteemed guests. We are now on day 5 of our AICTE sponsored faculty development program on From Goals to Outcome Designing Education for Measurable SDG Impact. This FDP has been truly a journey of ideas, innovation, and inspiration, from understanding the foundation of sustainable development goals to exploring how policy, pedagogy, and governance can align with measurable education outcomes. Each day has brought us closer to envisaging education as a real driver of societal change. And today, we move from concept to case studies, from framework to fieldwork. The theme for today's session is Case Studies from India and Abroad, What Works in SDG Impact. The session holds significance because it helps us see how theory meets practice. It reveals how institutions and researchers across the world are translating the sustainable development goals into tangible, measurable outcomes. These case studies not only inspire us, but also provide valuable insights into replicable model of success that can guide our own institution towards sustainable transformation. It gives me immense pleasure and pride to introduce our distinguished resource person for the day, Dr. Kerren Rajoo, Senior Lecturer at University Putra, Malaysia, and the Head of the Biodiversity Borneo Laboratory. Dr. Kerren is an internationally recognized scholar and environmental innovator who exemplifies the very spirit of sustainability in action. He leads groundbreaking research on nature-based solutions with a focus on sustainable waste management, ecology, and forest therapy. Among his most impactful initiative is the Towards Zero Food Waste in Bintulu project, a collaborative effort with the Bintulu Development Authority and the Tokyo University of Agriculture. He also heads the Designing Waste Management for an Inclusive Circular Economy project funded by the government of Japan. Through these pioneering efforts, Dr. Kerren contributes directly to SDG 12, Responsible Consumption and Production, and SDG 13, Climate Action, by integrating science, technology, and community participation to create sustainable model for resource use and environmental protection. Dr. Kerren work beautifully embodies what we mean by education for impact. Research does not stay confined into the lab, but reaches the community, influences policy, and inspire positive environmental change across borders. We are truly honored to have you with us today, sir. So without further ado, I request Dr. Kerren Rajoo, sir, for his session on case study from India and abroad, what worked best in SDG Impact. Over to you, sir.
Hi, good afternoon, Dr. Neha. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're audible.
Okay, so good afternoon, Dr. Neha, and good afternoon, everyone. First and foremost, I would like to thank Dr. Neha and also Teerthanker Mahaveer University for extending this invitation to me so that I can share a little about SDG education. So as Dr. Neha has already given a wonderful introduction, thank you very much for the introduction. To be honest with you, my background is not in SDG education, but as Dr. Neha has already mentioned, I work a lot regarding environmental sustainability. Currently, I'm focusing on waste management. So SDG education is very important in these areas. And I think it's also very important to most of the fields that we are working on right now. So which is something that we all need to be aware. So what I'm going to share today is some of the case studies that I've evaluated and have analyzed, and hope to share what I've learned from that, which I've already integrated into my own projects, and hope to share that understanding with you all. So without further ado, allow me to share my slides.
Yes, sir. Sir, now you can share your slides.
Is it visible?
Yes, it's visible, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so before I begin my presentation, I think the first question that we need to ask is why SDG education? Like, why are we talking about it in the first place? So there's 4 things that we should know about SDG education that makes it actually in a very unique position. Firstly, Education is in itself a SDG goal, SDG 4, which is quality education. But it is also a means to achieving all other 17 goals. So this is especially true for SDG 3, which is progress in health, or SDG 13, climate action, SDG 5, gender equality, or SDG 8, economic growth, where you cannot achieve any of these SDGs if you do not incorporate it into education. And this applies actually to all 17 SDGs. So one example that I would like to bring that is, for me, is quite interesting is the school-based deworming in Kenya, in Africa, which was actually developed based on SDG 4, quality education, but it also improved health of the students in Kenya, which shows that it's actually impactful towards SDG 3 as well, which is progress in health. And also, secondly, context and relevance matters. Education is transformative only when it connects with local problem and context. This means that student learns best about global goals like SDGs when it's actually made tangible through their daily realities. So meaning that they will only understand the importance of SDG or these global goals and whatnot when you actually explain or put it into the context that is in their everyday life. So this relevance will turn the abstract concepts into actually lived experience. So I will ensure retention and motivation. And all this is only possible through education. Thirdly, knowledge plus agency equals to transformation. Knowledge alone is not enough because knowledge only gives you the practical understanding, i.e., you know how to do it, but with agency, i.e., the capacity to act, that is when you can actually apply what is learned. When you combine both of this, only then transformation is possible. So for instance, when you give students leadership role and you educate them, they will be able to apply what they have learned in the classroom into action. So in other words, the combination of knowing and doing is what changes community. And it all starts with education. And fourth, and last but not least, institutional culture shift. When SDGs are embedded across teaching and operations and governance, the entire institution changes. So evidence has shown that schools and universities adopting this SDG frameworks, they report actually measurable shift in student behavior. I'll show you some of the case studies that actually exemplify this. And there's also stronger sustainability practices in operations and even policy influence at local and national level. One of the case studies that I'll bring up, which is in Ghana, actually shows this, how education in schools actually influence governmental policy on a federal level. And this all starts through education. So what does all this mean? The bottom line is SDG education is not just about curriculum add-ons, meaning that it's not just about what you learn in classroom. It's actually about cultivating problem solvers and citizens that can actively put into action what they learn into classroom. And secondly, by linking local challenges to global goals, education creates a multiplier effect. It improves learning, it shapes institutions, and it builds sustainable societies. This is what the case studies will amplify. How just by incorporating SDG into education effectively, it actually can effectively change the fabric of society or the entire country as a whole. So for today's agenda, I'll first talk about framing the SDG education, i.e. how we want to contextualize the whole education framework, SDG education framework. Then we'll go into case studies. I will be covering 4 case studies for today's presentation, including one from India, and also the cross-cutting insights, i.e. what we can learn from these 4 case studies. And I'll go briefly on a snapshot of all 70 SDGs education, because obviously there won't be enough time to go into each and every one, but we'll just go in, briefly into detail, of each of the 17 SDGs. And the transferable lessons that we can gain from all these 17 case studies. Of course, we'll move on to the practical first steps, i.e. what we can do today, if not tomorrow, and the call to action and discussion. So first of all, to conceptualize this SDG education, let's talk about UNESCO and ESD framework. When I'm talking about UNESCO ESD framework, I'm talking about the UNESCO Education for Sustainable Development, ESD for short, roadmap for 2030. It's actually if I'm not mistaken, it's about a 60 to 70 page report that was developed to actually guide how SDG education can be implemented in schools or in institution. So but the important thing about this report that I want to highlight is that firstly, it actually recognizes that SDG 4, which is SDG education, is not a standalone SDG, but also as a cross-cutting driver for achieving all 17 SDGs, which is what I already told earlier. You cannot achieve the other 17 SDGs if you do not incorporate education into the other 17. And it also provides a structure that countries and institutions and educators can align to ensure consistency and accountability, meaning that people or institutions in different countries all across the world, they will actually have a framework that everyone can follow to, so that we all do not work in separate bubbles. Now, there's 5 priority areas that was identified in this report. I'll just go briefly on each one. Firstly, on advanced policy. This is to ensure that governments and ministries embedded in ESD in education policy, curriculum, and funding priorities. So meaning that the SDG education is not just something that's taught in the classroom, but it's actually integrated to how the institution operates. That's why you need advanced policy that actually mandates how the institution or these respective schools operate. Next, secondly, it transforms learning environments. So schools and universities should practice what they teach, meaning that you not just teach something about SDG in the classroom, but you actually need to implement it on the ground. So campuses will model sustainability, i.e., for instance, through waste management or energy efficiency. The point is that what the students learn in the classroom, they need to actually see it happening in their respective schools and institutions. Thirdly, build educator capacity. Teachers need training and support to confidently integrate sustainability in their lessons. So teachers or educators or lecturers, they need to get the training or whatnot, just like what Teerthanker Mahaveer University is doing right now with this program, which is form of building educator capacity, so that they know how to actually educate or to integrate SDG education into the school system. Fourthly, empower youth. So students should not be passive recipients, but actually actively implement what they learn, i.e. become leaders in their respective communities. So most of the case studies that I'm going to share with you will actually amplify this, that most of the youths that's involved in these programs, they are not active participants. They do not just listen, take an exam, and they're done with it. But they actually need to implement what they learn on the ground, in their schools or in their respective communities. So the reason why this is actually very important is because the students need to feel that their action actually matters, that they're not passive participants, that if they do not act, then the benefits or the sustainability will not happen. So only then will they take action. Last but not least, accelerate local and community action. So education should always link to real community issue. So meaning that, like what I told earlier, when you're talking about SDG goals, it seems global, it seems international. Most students, like talking about maybe 12 or 13-year-olds, they will see this as an international problem, something that concerns maybe politicians or adults, but does not concern them. That is why it's very important to tie whatever education regarding SDG that you're implementing in your institution, it needs to be tied back into your community, so that they realize that there is a local need for that SDG. So the bottom line is, why does this all matter? Well, the simplest way to put it, SDG education provides a road to our destination. So it can only achieve meaningful impact if SDG education implements these 5 priority areas. So by framing them within this UNESCO's roadmap, we can see how global principles translate into practical local results. So how do we implement these top 5 priority areas? The simple answer is, you require a whole institution approach. No individual or no classroom can work on its own. You need the whole institution to be involved. So what does it mean? There's four aspects that we have to talk about when talking about whole institution approach. Firstly, leadership. Senior leaders, be it your chancellors or your presidents or your deans or faculties, they need to commit SDGs into their strategic plans and policies, meaning that the entire institution operates on the SDG education. It's not just a one-off classroom or one-off workshop. It needs to be how the institution operates. And the only way it's possible if is the upper management, the upper leadership get involved. Secondly, curriculum. Sustainability teams need to be integrated into teaching and learning across disciplines. So for some disciplines, like my background, which is in forestry and ecology, it's actually quite easy to integrate SDG education into our curriculum because it's environment and it's about sustainability. But there is some disciplines which unfortunately overlooks the incorporation of SDG education because they might not see the relevance of SDG into their particular fields. But that's not true. Every single field that there is that's being offered in institution can be linked to one of the 17 SDG goals. So you do not teach SDG as a separate subject, but you integrate it into a curriculum so that the students can actually see how their respective fields ties back to SDG. Thirdly, operations. So like I've already mentioned, how campuses operate need to also model the sustainable practices. You cannot teach students about recycling in the classroom, but then when they leave the classroom, they only see a single bin where everyone's throwing everything into that single bin. So students will not see the practical effects of what they're learning. It's only SDG education can only be effective if you teach them the classroom, and when they leave the classroom, they see what is being taught is being practiced in your respective institution, which is very important because it creates a sense of culture. So values of sustainability become part of the identity of the school or university. So basically it becomes the DNA of the institution, and this influences the staff and students daily. So why it works? Because it moves beyond a one-time event mentality, meaning that you just attend one classroom or one program and then you participate in something, you get a certificate and you're done. That does not happen when you do this whole institution approach. And it aligns with UNESCO's principle of transforming learning environments. And most importantly, it builds legitimacy. When students see the whole institution involved, they take efforts seriously. So what's the takeaway for institutions or for faculties? Is that faculty efforts are strongest when supported by institutional culture and leadership. So if one educator, one lecturer, one teacher does it, the impact will not be as profound if the entire institution actually incorporates it into their teaching, into their operation, and into their culture. So it's important for us to think beyond one classroom project, one lesson project. We need to facilitate students to put what they learn into action, into the broader school or university systems, or even better, into the respective communities, so that they can actually build something that is continuous. Now, this multiplies the impact, and it also aligns with the ESD roadmap's 5 priorities that I mentioned earlier. Now, let's move on to the case studies that I've mentioned that we will be talking for today. So there is 4 case studies that I would like to highlight today for me personally, which I'll say that I'm really impressed by, and it's something that I actually incorporate into my own work. So the 4 case studies I'd like to talk about is firstly in Ghana, SDG 4, quality education. Secondly, in India, which is for SDG 12, responsible consumption, the Green Schools program. I think most of you might be aware of it, but it's something that I learned online. I was actually very impressed by it. And thirdly, Czech Republic, which is SDG 13, climate action. And also lastly, which is more of a multinational level on global higher education network, which is for SDG 17 partnership. So let's move on, jump straight to SDG 4, Ghana, World Vision Ghana's Unlock Literacy project. So before moving on to what was implemented, let's talk about the overall context and challenges, or what they actually want to address in the first place. So the first thing about the issue in Ghana is that Ghana, despite having made significant progress in their education, but many children in rural and peri-urban areas still lack foundational literacy skills. Unfortunately, by grade 3, there was a large number of children who were still unable to read fluently or to even comprehend text, either in English or even their own mother tongue. I also have to highlight that the overall literacy rate in Ghana is less than 70%, which is quite low. So the literacy gaps were among the most severe in the poor households, the poorest households and rural schools. So this is actually expected. Unfortunately, it's true in almost any country. It's often, this literacy issue is often plagued by the poorest members of community because the parents are either too poor to send their children to school, they want their children to work, and this creates children who do not have the school skills or literacy skills to elevate their standard of living, and they create more poor children and whatnot. So it's a very vicious cycle where they are unable to elevate from their poverty levels. So why literacy matters for SDGs? Okay, it's a gateway skill. What do I mean by gateway skill is that without it, students struggle in other subjects and later job opportunities. Okay, so basically, when you are able to read and write, having basic literacy skills, you are empowered to actually gain more knowledge, to learn more, and to do well in school for all other subjects. That is the first skill that is needed. So when students fail that, they basically fail their entire education, their entire school system, and they fail to learn all other 17 SDGs. So even beyond academics, the literacy actually empowers students to express their opinions, to even question policies and authorities, and basically to participate in civil life. So without literacy, they become excluded from society because they are not powered to actually express what they feel and what they think. And lack of literacy contributes to limited civic voice and perpetuates the vicious cycles of poverty and exclusion. Now, the twofold challenge. Firstly, improve foundational literacy. This is the first challenge that they needed to address, which is children needed materials and teaching methods that supported reading fluency and comprehension. Of course, starting with their local languages or their mother tongue. And secondly, to build civic agency and participations. Students needed opportunities to apply literacy in meaningful ways, not just reading words, but actually using their voice in community and civic settings. Now, the scale of problem is actually quite large because as the agency unlocked literacy, they targeted almost 60,000 children, more than 1,500 teachers, and more than 200 schools. This shows how widespread the issue was. It's requiring both systematic and community-based interventions. It looks like a huge challenge, but how did unlocked literacy manage to address it? Okay, so why is this case relevant? Why are we talking about it? One word: empowerment. This case study will show you how SDG 4, quality education, when integrated into education, can be linked to agency and empowerment. It shows how initiative can combine skill acquisition with civic engagement. One of the examples that I'll be showing you is the student parliament system. And it also provides lesson on integrating literacy with broader social outcomes. So how was this program implemented? Well, firstly, the Unlock Literacy program was developed by World Vision Ghana to address literacy and empowerment together. And it involved multiple levels within institutions, society, and even the government. So the methodology, firstly, was teacher training. So over 1,500 teachers were trained in child-centered and interactive teaching methods. They will also emphasize on read aloud strategies, i.e. using their mother tongue, English, or local languages to actually be able to read aloud and to also interact with the teachers. The goal was to make reading relatable and bring comprehension, not just memorization. So meaning that before the teachers to teach the students, they actually taught the teachers how to teach. So that creates the sustainability approach. Secondly, reading clubs. They established over 175 clubs, if not mistaken, across schools. It was almost 200 reading clubs. Now, these clubs, they are just not beyond just school activities because they actually provided safe, engaging spaces for children to practice outside class. So the education does not stop in the classroom. It actually continued even after school sessions. So in the reading clubs, they didn't just simply read, but it actually included games, storytelling, and even role plays like dramas and whatnot. So they actually enjoyed the whole reading process. It wasn't a chore, it wasn't an assignment, or something that they wanted to participate in. That's why these reading clubs actually became very popular in Ghana society. Thirdly, they also implemented kids' parliaments. Now, the interesting thing about these kids' parliaments is that it was modeled after Ghana's own parliament. So the students not only learn how the parliament system worked, but they also learned that they could one day be part of the parliament, that sense of empowerment. So in this parliament, the students actually debated real community issues. For instance, like the unsafe water or sanitation issue that was plaguing their society or their schools. So they developed skills of critical thinking, public speaking, and even civic participation. So you can see that this literacy project was beyond just simply reading and writing, but it actually made them better civic individuals who were brave enough to actually participate in the society's biggest, most pertinent issue and to find solutions for those issues. Fourthly, this is something that I need to highlight that is actually very important, is community involvement. They mobilize older students as reading buddies to support younger learners. So the older students, they actually felt like their actions matter. This is where what I told you previously, student leaders, they need to understand that their actions actually has profound and long-lasting impact. So when you tell the older students that they have the responsibility to teach the younger students, they will take their own lessons, their own literacy skills and whatnot more seriously because they feel more responsible. And even beyond that, parents and older siblings or even older like uncles and aunties or older relatives, they volunteered in reading programs like literacy festivals, book fairs, or even library days. So this shows that not the education was not bubbled within just the school, but everyone within society was actually getting involved in the teaching of their children. Fifthly, resources and sustainability. They, of course, provided low-cost reading books for them to actually conduct their lessons, including the games and what I told you previously. But how did they get the funding? They actually got it by partnering with businesses who were involved in corporate social responsibility activities, i.e. CSR funds. So this actually ensured that the project wasn't a one-off, because if you seek funding from, let's be honest, if you seek funding from government agencies, it's usually a one-off fund. They give you a certain amount, you're supposed to implement it. Once the fund has run out, it's very rare that you're going to get continuous funding. So when they actually engage with businesses, they continuously have funds. They're earning income on a annual basis. So they take the CSR funds from these businesses and incorporate it into these programs so that it can be continuously run. So these actually increase the likelihood of long-term adoption and scaling up. Okay, and next and lastly, government partnership. They also work closely with the Ghana Education Services, GES, which is responsible for the syllabus in schools. So that they align the methods that they implemented, although it's innovative, although it's out of the box, out of the conventional education system, but they make sure that it's aligned with the national curriculum, so that the education does not separate itself from the local context, that is actually amplifying or actually modifying or improving the local syllabus that's already being taught in schools. So what are the outcomes? Firstly, there was very significant literacy gains from this project, where assessments showed that children in this unlocked literacy program had notable gains in reading fluency and also comprehension compared to the schools that were not involved. So in some districts, the grade 2 students were able to read with comprehension rising by more than 20%. There are also evidence that they confirmed that the use of mother tongue materials and teacher coaching actually directly contributed to these improvements. Beyond that, teachers actually revealed that, the teacher surveys revealed that over 90% of them notice higher classroom engagement by the students. So this shows that once the children actually gain the skills, or literacy skill, they're actually brave enough to voice out their opinions or their feelings. And being brave enough to voice out makes them active participants. That is the ultimate goal of SDG education. So the students demonstrated that they had increased questioning, problem solving, and even general participations. Teachers also noted that students were no longer afraid to challenge ideas or express their views. Next, the children parliaments. The students raised real community issues like unsafe drinking water and sanitation through Kids Parliament. And this actually, this initiative actually pressured the local government to actually have responses, because when collectively you have hundreds, if not thousands of children voicing out the same concerns, politicians obviously have to address it. So the local government, they started addressing all the issues, including repairing water facilities and whatnot. Now, civic agency was built around literacy. So this shows that there's a dual benefit, i.e. they learn and they also learn to put their voice into action. Now, this is actually a very, for me, it's a very impactful impact, which is that enrollment for the schools rose by 10 to 15% in the schools that was participating in this project. So meaning that, like what I told you earlier, unfortunately, poor people, they do not send their children to school. Actually, they saw the benefit of this literacy program, and that encouraged the parents to actually start sending their children to school. So that is a very big impact in terms of SDG for quality education. Fifth, community impact. Parents and volunteers reinforce literacy at home. So because parents and the volunteers, they were involved in this program by being in the book fairs and also reading festivals. So they felt like they also had a responsibility to play, and they brought this kind of culture back into home. So meaning that they were learning beyond school hours. So this builds a literacy supportive environment both in and out of the school. And lastly, in terms of recognition and validation, they were awarded the prestigious UNESCO Japan Prize for Education for Sustainable Development, which is actually a very sought after prize. So this actually shows that there is recognition for their project, and it actually encourages other institutions, other schools to embrace this project, because they see that even internationally it is recognized. So let's move on to the second SDG, because of course we are short of time, which is in India, the Green Schools program. This personally, actually, I find it, it's a very impressive program. So I'm pretty sure that most of you have already heard about it. But in terms of SDG education, of course, we need to dissect it to see what really works and how we can implement it in our own SDG education. So firstly, context and challenges. So according to the Center for Science and Environment in New Delhi, they say that Indian schools face several challenges, namely water use, where they identified that many schools consume high volumes of water without recycling or harvesting systems, waste generation, and food practices, which is they do not separate their waste, and it's very dependent on landfills. Also, there's limited recycling infrastructure. This, unfortunately, is also a major problem here in Malaysia, which is why one of my focus is waste-based research. Thirdly, energy consumption, where they highlighted there was inefficient use of electricity and also limited awareness about renewable options. Fourthly, food practices, where they notice canteens and hostels often generate significant food waste and use unsustainable packaging. Once again, this unfortunately is also a major issue here in Malaysia. So this is also one thing that I'm trying to address here in Malaysia. Fifthly, biodiversity and campus ecology, where they found that urban campuses often lack green cover or biodiversity management. So all these challenges, they connect directly to SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production. So these challenges, they affect both daily campus operations and also the mindset of students who will shape future consumption patterns, and of course in their respective communities, something which I will extend on later. So the first question is, if these issues is, like what I said, it's already plaguing maybe the communities and adults, but why are we targeting schools? Well, basically schools are microcosms of society. So if sustainability can be practiced at schools, it will actually directly affect households and communities. Because engaging students at a young age builds lifelong sustainable habits. What you learn at a young age is very likely that you're going to implement it as you get older. And teachers and administrators can model sustainable decision-making through their operations and curriculum choices. So basically what I'm trying to say is that what these children learn in school, they're going to bring back to their households. They're going to teach their older siblings, their parents, their relatives, and they are going to implement whatever they learn from their kids. The neighbors are going to see these families, and neighbors are going to implement it, and that slowly creates a change in the entire society. That is why we call it the microcosms of society. So to address this, that is why the Center for Science and Environment, they launched the Green School program, which I'll explain later on how it was implemented. And why does this case study? Why am I bringing up this case study? Because it actually demonstrates how schools can tackle SDG 12 by embedding sustainability into their daily routines. And it also provides a model for systematic, measurable action that can scale from local to national level. And this will serve as an example of how audits and accountability mechanisms create lasting behavior change. So how was it implemented? So referring to their website, the latest data they have is 2023. So as of 2023, there was over 7,000 schools across 29 states in India which participated. I'm pretty sure that the number is a lot higher now in 2025. So the way they register is that they register in an online platform that was managed by the center itself, and they will receive a detailed audit toolkit, which structured questions and checklists and whatnot. So they basically get a system where they can check their schools and see what they are lacking and how to address it. And the toolkit then translates into sustainability actions, which can be counted and also be improved based on data. So the actual methodology, firstly, they form student audit teams. This, I would like to highlight that it's actually the student themselves who is involved in the audit teams, not the teachers. So like what I told you before, student leadership, the students know that their action actually has an impact. So each school, they will either set up a green club or an audit team, usually within 20 to 30 students, and of course guided by a teacher or teacher advisor. So the teacher is usually a science or environmental coordinator, someone who has a background in sustainability. So these students who are in this green club, they act as green auditors, taking real responsibility for data collection and reporting. So like I said, this not only encourages student leadership, it also encourages teamwork and also problem solving. Secondly, audit process and timeline. The environmental audit typically takes 4 to 6 months to complete. So it's not a one-off program. It's something that needs to be continuously done for almost half a year. So the students, what they are supposed to do is they measure their daily water use, and they need to identify any leaks or wastage. So they also audit waste streams, how much goes to the landfill versus how much is actually being recycled, or for food waste, how much is being composted. They also track school electricity bills and identify patterns of use, i.e. how much is being wasted. They document all the biodiversity that's on campus so that they can see how much is how green basically their schools are, and whether there is a need to change that. They also review food practices, i.e. how much is being wasted, the packaging, all this, because this is all part of sustainability. So what this does is actually it provides a hands-on approach on science, and it actually provides a practical sustainability management, meaning that they know exactly what they need to be done and they do it according to the specific guidelines. Thirdly, most importantly, there's also support for the teachers and school. So the center, it organizes these webinar, workshops, and these guidance materials continuously to train teachers in how to run these audits. In turn, these teachers will then teach the students on how to do the audits. So beyond that, beyond the audits, they also teach on low-cost interventions, i.e. what can be done to improve their sustainability at the school. For instance, composting strategies, how to install rainwater harvesting systems, also these waste recycling bins, and maybe even energy saving practices, like for instance, switching to solar panels or LED lights. There's also a recognition system. So schools are rated either bronze, silver, gold, or platinum based on their audit results. So it might seem like something trivial, but actually recognition will motivate the schools and the students to actually have something to look forward to, a system of progress, a sort of a challenge that they can improve over time. So this creates healthy competition for each school who wants to become better or wants to compete with one another to improve themselves. And this actually translates to proper sustainable changes on the ground. Fifthly, peer learning and innovation. So the center also encourages schools to share their innovations. So for instance, some schools have these no plastic campaigns. So they actually share it with the other schools, and some schools actually copy it and they implement it in their respective schools. Beyond that, they even share it to the communities, so communities can emulate it. So some schools even created biogas digesters, which is for me really interesting, so they can get clean cooking gas. Also, some of the awareness campaigns that they implement, like for instance on energy saving, so they show what is being done, they share it with their peers, and the peers can either learn from it, also just copy it and implement it in their respective schools and societies. So why, before I go into outcomes, I want to just say like, so why does this actually work? Is mainly it's because for me it's two things. Firstly, it's because the students are not passive practitioners; they're actually active. They're actually being the person who is implementing the changes. So they realize that their actions have impact. And secondly, you have actual data. That's very important for you to know the changes that is being made. So as we go towards the outcomes, like what is the impact of this project? Firstly, like I mentioned before, data collection. So when you have the data, it's actually designed around audits and metrics. So all the schools can be tracked. We can know actually what is being done in the school. So the outcomes makes it both measurable and comparable across schools, districts, and states. So you know what works, what doesn't, what can be copied, what does not, what needs to be changed. Next, water savings. In New Delhi alone, participating schools have cut their monthly water usage by about 25% after participating in this project, because they install reuse and rainwater harvesting systems. So this shows that when schools are aware of the what they're doing wrong, and then educated on what they can do to improve it, then you can see meaningful changes. In terms of waste management, this is actually quite impressive, because on a national scale level, the participating schools saw a waste reduction of about 14%, which is actually quite significant. And in one example alone in Punjab, one school improved 60% of their recycling rate to 100% in just 1 year. That for me is actually very impressive. So they also noted behavioral changes in students. Their survey showed that about 70% of students adopted at least one eco-friendly habit at home, meaning that what they learn in school, they implement it in household. This can be either reducing food waste or saving electricity. So this confirms that school-based action actually spills over into households and communities. Fifthly, academic benefits. This is actually quite interesting, because 68.8% of the schools reported that the schools that participated in this program actually saw an overall improvement in academic performance. So when questioned why this was possible, they said that they linked this to their developing their problem solving, teamwork, and even leadership skills through the activities that was implemented in this program. So this suggests that sustainability education is not actually a distraction from the education, but actually it enhances the learning quality. Fifthly, it also has a policy influence. Several states have now mandated environmental audits in their school, and it can be directly linked to this program. So this shows that how grassroots school programs, like something that seems very small, can actually influence state level policy. So the key takeaway we can say from this system is that the green school programs, it demonstrates that systematic data-driven approaches can deliver measurable environmental, behavioral, education, and even policy changes. It positions schools as role model for sustainable consumption and production, especially under SDG-12. So let's move on to the third case study that I would like to highlight, which is in the Czech Republic, the CO2 or carbon dioxide leak. So like usual, firstly, the context the challenges that they were trying to address. So according to some studies, they found that climate education in Czech Republic faced a gap where many lower secondary school students, those aged between 13 and 15, showed low climate literacy. So baseline surveys, they revealed that about 30% of students, only about 30% of students could actually explain what is the causes of climate change. So what's the issue is, what is the problem with climate illiteracy or climate apathy? So when students do not understand the causes of climate change, or they do not understand what is the impacts of their actions towards climate change, these will create students who I think the best way for me to put it is apathy, or they do not have the willingness to actually change their behavior, because they don't really see the need to change it, because they do not know what actions they do can actually impact climate change. There's also traditional teaching limitation, where standard classroom lessons provided information, but evaluations showed that they did not significantly improve climate change knowledge and behavior. So what this means is that the students in this classroom, they see climate education as something that is theoretical, or something that is irrelevant to their daily life. This is where I have to go back to a priority, where you do not integrate SDG into the local context. The students will not understand their actions actually has an impact on a national or on a planetary level. So that's why the Ecological Institute started the CO2 leak competition, which I'll explain in the next slide in more detail. So why is this case study relevant? Why am I bringing it up? I want to show you the power of knowledge. Okay, so how knowledge actually can create a long and lasting impact, not just in terms of SDG education, but the SDG goals of a particular country. So let's go to the implementation. So the CO2 leak was implemented for one full academic year, and it involved 47 lower secondary schools, i.e. 13 to 15-year-old. These are students age that are most impressionable, i.e. what they learn at this age, they are most likely going to implement for their entire adult life. So the methodology, firstly, there was a structured curriculum. So this is not just a one-off classroom or one-off workshop. There was actually 10 modules that was delivered across the entire school year. So these 10 modules, they covered all aspects of climate change, including the basics of greenhouse gases and effects on climate systems, how the local climate impacts checks towns and cities. So this is the local context, and how they can calculate the personal, household, and school carbon footprints, so that they can understand that their own personal actions actually has an impact on climate change, and also practical solution for reducing emissions at both schools and home, i.e. what they not just what they can learn at the classroom, but how they can put what they learn in the classroom into action. They also started team-based activities where students worked in class-based teams to measure school energy use and temperature trends, calculate their household carbon footprints, and also towards the end could create pledges to actually reduce the emission. So this is actually very similar to the green school programs in India, where the students themselves have to do the auditing and they themselves have to make the changes, i.e. student leaders. Thirdly, there's actually competition and projects where actually the students competed with one another for points by completing real-world projects. So what are these real projects? Including tree planting within their schools or within the society and community, whether they conducted awareness campaigns, be it posters or social media or peer teaching, and also household energy audits, how much was done, and whether they had recycling drives. So each time they complete something like this, they get a point. And so they did this league format where everyone was aware of the points and how they're gaining the points. And this created an ongoing sense of competition and achievement. There's, of course, just like the green school programs, there was also support for teachers, where teachers receive continuous training sessions and lesson plans aligned with the modules. They reduce the barrier for educators who might otherwise feel unprepared. So, of course, when you're teaching 10 new modules where they are not aware, you need to train the teachers first, and then the teachers are able to teach the students. So this will be make them prepared on how to actually address climate change illiteracy. And of course, NGO partnerships. So local environmental NGOs, they partnered with this society to deliver workshops and also to provide on-the-ground mentoring. So this not only strengthens the program's effectiveness, but it also creates a sense of community where the entire community needs to take part to make meaningful changes. There's also motivation and engagement, where because they use a shared online platform to show the points and also to track progress, So students can continuously see how their school rank against other schools in the country. So this, of course, because they're kids, they create a sense of excitement. It's the same thing like football or cricket leagues where you see your teams, you know the points, you know how they're doing, and that creates a sense of competition that you want to do better. So even though the activities were held like maybe weekly for like maybe just 1 to 2 hours, these students actually reported that they started doing activities after school events. So meaning that it was beyond the required 1 2 hours, they actually spend more hours after school to continue the program to get more points. That shows that there is continuity and sustainability beyond the classroom. So the outcomes. Firstly, like just I mentioned to you previously for the Green School programs, there is a system where you can continuously collect data so that you can actually track the progress to see what works and what doesn't work. So they can actually even they actually did a study, a quasi-experimental study to do a pre-post design, i.e. to see how the schools which participated in this project had influenced climate change apathy compared to the schools which were not involved, i.e. the control groups. So from this, they got strong evidence to actually show that the method of education has profound and long-lasting impact. At the end of the day, data is very important. So the knowledge gains, and in terms of students' knowledge for climate science actually rose significantly, where average scores or average quiz or test scores actually improve after completing the program by an average of 20%. So the knowledge cover was both scientific concepts and also practical understanding, meaning that what they learned was not just what they could do in the classroom, but also what they could put into action. So from knowledge to concern, so the increase in knowledge translated into greater personal concern about climate change. Because once they understand their actions actually has impact, they will be more concerned about their own action. There's also a marked rise in number of students who felt that climate change was a serious, immediate issue. So this shows that concern is important because it drives motivation to act. Now, the interesting thing was that there was also behavioral spillover, like what I already mentioned to you about schools acting like microcosms of society. Around 70% of the students actually reported that they convinced their families to adopt at least one energy-saving measure. So the most common energy-saving measures that they took was switching towards LED and solar lighting. They also reduced food waste by planning their meals more carefully, and they cut electricity by unplugging unused devices. This all seems like small, trivial matters, but when talking about 70% of students affecting their families, the changes can be very large on a national level. Now, moving on to the carbon footprint reduction, on average, students reported a 15% reduction in their personal carbon footprint. So you're talking about thousands of students, 15% each. That's a very profound and meaningful change. So how do they achieve this? Well, some of them decided to start cycling and walking instead of using short car trips. Some even reduced meat consumption, as I think all of us are aware. One of the biggest drivers for greenhouse gases is the livestock, especially cows, and also conserving heating and cooling energy at home. So, and the best part is that there was a sustained impact, because 2 months after the program completion, there were still students who was, the majority of students were still active as they as what they call themselves as climate champions. So they continue to do the activities or programs that they actually perform in school on their own free will, despite it beyond the competition. So this shows that the program, when you create it as something that's fun, something that's competitive, and also education in a way where the children actually can practice what they learn, it creates long-lasting impact, not just small-term habit changes. So when we talk about the key takeaway, knowledge creates concern, i.e. they understand that their action actually matters. And that creates self-efficacy, i.e. the need for them to actually do something about it, and real-life action. So the chain is crucial for climate education. Facts alone do not change behavior, but when knowledge builds confidence, students act. Now, last but not least, the last case study that I would like to bring up is SDG 17, the SDG Accord by the Environmental Association for Communities and Colleges. So as usual, firstly, context and challenges, what was being addressed. So according to the Environmental Association for University and Colleges, many higher education institutions actually have involved in sustainability work by the mid-2010s. I forgot the exact number, but it was almost 80 or 90% that have all these institutions has already taken part in this kind of activities. But all these efforts were often fragmented, meaning that they were limited to isolated projects, or they were led by individual departments without all institution coordination. So why is this an issue? So the problem of not having a common framework is that higher education institutions are not united globally around the SDGs, despite all working towards it. So everyone is working for the same thing, but they're not coordinating the effort. They're all working in bubbles. So there's really no impactful change in terms of a combined coordinated effort. There's also poor accountability, i.e. there is no sense of, to put it in the simplest of terms, there is no data to actually see what is the impact, so what is the changes. So you cannot even compare which methods is successful, which is not successful. And they're just doing it in the terms of like in their own isolated work. So, and this also creates a poor potential to share what they are, to share what they're doing with the whole world, or to even to their respective nations, especially programs which are very impactful. So sometimes this fragmentation also will mean duplication, meaning that in some areas, like for instance, maybe like in terms of recycling, everyone does it, but then some parts, nobody is doing it, i.e. there's neglect. So some SDG goals might be overlooked or might not be taken seriously. And this actually slows progress, because for true sustainability, you need to focus on all 17 SDGs. So why higher education matters for SDGs? Well, university and colleges influence not only their own campuses and communities, but they also influence the next generation of leaders, policymakers, and professionals. Because whoever is going to lead the country the next day, in the coming generation or not, most of them are the ones that will be taking the education in these respective universities. So embedding into SDGs into higher education has a multiplier effect, i.e. shaping research, teaching operations, and societal engagement. So the response is that the Environmental Association for University and Colleges, i.e. the EAUC, they developed the SDG Accord, a systematic global framework where higher educations can formally commit to the SDG in an organized, sustainable manner. I'll explain this more in the next slide. So why are we talking about this case? Well, I want to show you that shared accountability actually matters, and that is based on global partnership. So let's talk about the implementation. So as of 2025, the Accord has already 207 signatory institutions across 34 countries. The best part is that the countries actually represent both the global north and global south. So it is actually a truly international partnership. Then the institution, they range from really large research universities to smaller colleges. So it shows that it has a very broad applicability. So next, let's go on the methodology. Firstly, commitment at a leadership level. So the institutions can only join when a senior leadership level, i.e. vice chancellor, director, or president, makes a formal pledge. So it cannot be done by, say, like a lecturer or even a dean for the matter. It needs to come from the highest authority. Why this is needed is because it needs to ensure that the commitment is not just symbolic, but it's actually embedded into the institutional strategy and governance. And of course, this needs to be done, can only be achieved when, to put it in the simplest terms, the big boss of the institution takes action. Next is embedding the SDGs into strategy. Each signatory agrees to integrate the SDGs across key domains. This includes leadership and governance, campus operations, curriculum, research, and community outreach. So meaning that all levels from teaching to implementing, everything needs to have needs to be linked towards a particular SDG. So this is actually something that most of us are already being done, but the way they report it, of course, is a more systematic level that we can collect data more efficiently. There's also annual reporting accountability, where institutions are required to report their progress every year. So the report actually covers both quantitative indicators, like, for instance, waste reduction, energy use, the number of SDG-linked courses, and also qualitative examples like how many partnerships that they have made, and how many students are actually implementing changes in their everyday life. So this actually creates a system where you can collect data that can be centralized and can be systematically evaluated, i.e. statistically analyzed, so that they can actually publish these findings in an annual synthesis report. So when you get this report, you can actually use it as a global benchmarking and accountability, i.e. you can see how your institution compares with other institutions, especially within your region. So you can know what works and what doesn't. There's also peer learning and knowledge sharing. So this accord actually emphasizes collective learning rather than just compliance. So they have global webinars that is organized on a regular basis, where cross-country, cross-international, multinational countries will share what they're doing, and other countries can learn from it. There's also regional hubs. For instance, in Southeast Asia, there is this SDG Accord network, where all the institutions within Southeast Asia will share their context-specific strategies, because what works in Southeast Asia might not work in South Asia. So that's why you need this kind of regional hubs. It also encourages institutions to learn from peers with similar challenges and contexts. So partnerships beyond academia. It actually shows that the signatories use the accord to form external partnerships. So some of the accords they have actually signed with local governance, usually on city planning, and also with NGOs and industries, and even other industries. So this actually broadens the impact beyond campus walls, aligning with SDG 17, which focuses on partnership. Because anything can only be, true sustainability can only be achieved when all levels of society works together. So what are the outcomes? So data evidence shows that from the 2025 Accord report, that based on the data, you can provide a clear picture of the progress and strengths and gaps across the higher institution. So you can know whether what you're doing actually matters or is actually working, or what needs to be changed. There's also progress in the institutional integration, where 69% of the institutions are now at developing or established stage of whole organization sustainability. So there's actually a very large amount. So this means that actually most has moved beyond isolated projects, i.e. one-off projects in classroom or one webinar or one workshop, but they actually have moved on to a more systematic institution integrated approach. So this shows real momentum in embedding sustainability in an institution-wide approach. Now, the leadership commitment, where 78% of signatories have an SDG action plan formally endorsed by their senior leadership. So this reflects strong institutional buy-in and positions sustainability as part of their strategic governance. Now, student-led initiatives, that shows there was 15% increase in SDG team visitation and community projects within just 2 years. This indicates that students are not only learning about SDGs, but actually actively shaping projects and research. This demonstrates how institutional frameworks not just encourages grassroots students to learn, but to actually become leaders that effectively put what they learn into action. There's also an acceleration of sustainability work, where 90% of institutions report that signing the accord accelerated their sustainability initiative. So some of the benefits that they include was that the reason why they could accelerate their sustainability initiatives is because they gain a lot of new ideas and strategies by actually learning from their peer institutions. There's also greater motivation because they need to be accountable. They need to report to the accord. So there was a sense of accountability and also global benchmarking. They also had stronger justification for actually allocating budgets and staff to SDG work. I'm not sure about how it's hitting you, but one of the problems that we face here in the local institutions in Malaysia is that we always need to justify to get more budget to actually do these kind of projects. So when they are part of this SDG Accord, their higher management levels realize that they need to make meaningful changes, or otherwise they're going to be embarrassed on an international stage. So this is why they'll channel more funding to this kind of projects, and that creates a sense of sustainability. Now, of course, this is I'll say still work in progress. So there's still some remaining gaps and challenges. So firstly, there is like about over 30% of institutions say that they are only at an established stage of embedding sustainability into the curriculum, and over 60% report that fewer than a quarter of their teaching staff have received education for sustainable development training. So this highlights that faculty development and curriculum integration is one of the biggest barriers to SDG education. This suggests that the need for systematic investment in educator training and curriculum redesign. So the key takeaway is that partnerships can both motivate and also guide SDG education. Systematic reporting allows trackable progress while also creating accountability and systematic data analysis. But without stronger faculty capacity and curriculum integration, progress will be risked to be uneven or incomplete. So now that we have already gone through the 4 case studies that I wanted to highlight today, let's see what is the common traits across all the 4 areas. Firstly, student agency is central. Learners, i.e. students, cannot be passive recipients, but they need to be allowed to become active leaders, i.e. you need to show them or to allow them to put what they learn in the classroom into action. You can see this from instance like the reading buddies or the auditors in the green school programs or the climate champions or even project designers. So once they learn that their action actually matters, they are more likely to be accountable for their action. Secondly, you need measurable outcomes. Whether it's literacy rates or waste reduction or even carbon footprint, you need to produce data, because data is what shows you whether you're actually progressing or whether what you're doing is actually impactful. And from only that, you can learn. Not only that, you can also compare your data with other institutions to see what they're doing right that you might emulate, or what they are doing wrong so that you can educate them. So the bottom line is you need data. Thirdly, integration into institutional life. Success came when sustainability was embedded into daily cultures of schools and university, meaning that you need to practice what you teach in the classroom. If you treat it as just an add-on project, then there will not be a continuous effort on the students or the participants in their respective community. Fourth, last but not least, partnerships strengthen outcomes. Just like our partnership right now, we are knowledge sharing, we're learning from each other. So it doesn't matter whether it's from inter-institution on an international level, whether it's governments or NGOs, or communities, but everyone has a role to play to make sure that whatever they're doing is truly sustainable. Now, the takeaway from this all is that what we can learn from all this all is that, firstly, give student meaningful roles. Make sure that they're just not participants, but they're actually in leadership positions where they can implement on the ground changes. So this can be whether they inspire or educate or just take action with their own hands. So this is not only the key to sustainability, but also makes them feel like their efforts and contribution actually matters. Secondly, track and celebrate progress. No matter how small the progress, be it via survey or actual environment improvement like carbon emission reductions or waste generation, you need to celebrate it. So the only way you can celebrate it is with actual data, because without data, you do not know how impactful your actions truly are and what works and what doesn't. But the one thing that I want to highlight is that no matter how small the progress, celebrate it, especially by the younger generation. Thirdly, embed sustainability into the identity of the institution. It needs both top-down and bottom-up approaches to truly be sustainable. We should not work in vacuums. or in isolation for the matter. You need to embed the sustainability into the, I'll say, into the very DNA of your institution, so that everything that you do on campus, be it the operation or the education, it needs to start and end with sustainability. And this will take sustainability beyond the institution, but to a community, to even a state or national level, to even an international level when you have partnerships. But it all starts with the institution, no matter how small or large your organization is. So when we compare the metrics of all these 4 case studies, you'll see that all these 4 case studies, they have different focus, different mechanisms, and different skills. So what we can learn is that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to SDG education. Different contexts call for different strategies, meaning that you need to see the context or the local problem they are addressing and develop the SDG education to fit that particular context. So the practical lesson for faculty, I can say, is that educators can select or adapt models that best fit their students, resources, and also institutional culture, while still aligning with the global SDG framework. So some of the common success factors. Firstly, of course, whole institution integration. This is one of the first and foremost things that is vital. So successful programs, they're just not add-ons. They're not just one-off programs. They are actually embedded into the curriculum, to the leadership, and most importantly, into the daily culture. So when the accessibility becomes part of the institution's identity, the initiative actually endures beyond institutions into their respective communities. Secondly, partnerships. External partnerships strengthen legitimacy, provide expertise, and also mobilize resources. So what we can learn from this is that partnerships connect schools and universities with a wider ecosystem so that they don't work in a bubble. They are part of a larger community and society. Thirdly, student leadership, like I keep bringing it up, you need to teach students that they're not just recipients of education, but active drivers of change. When you empower the students, it actually amplifies the impact, because they do not just do they do not just change the action in their respective schools or institutions. They change in their household, impacting their parents, their relatives, and the respective members of society. And they will practice it when they become adults in the future. And of course, you need data and feedback loops, because what gets measured gets improved. It's the main reason why we do examination, to know how well we are doing and what needs to be improved. So when outcomes are tracked, the progress becomes visible, and this actually motivates not just the students, the teachers and the institutions, because they learn what works and what doesn't. So data-driven approaches, in the simplest terms, creates accountability, and it shows stakeholders that their effort actually matters. So beyond learning what works, we also need to know what fails so that we do not repeat the mistakes that's being done. Firstly, tokenism. One-off symbolic events, i.e. just a poster day or a single guest lecture or even Earth Day celebration. I frankly find Earth Day celebration as one of the key tokenisms. They do it to just raise temporary awareness, but the next day, everything's back to normal. There's no changes, there's no change, there's no there's no follow-up. So the impacts fade almost instantly within 24 hours. There's lack of continuity, which ties back to tokenism. So the projects start usually with the pilot funding, usually from the government actors. But once the funding is dried out, it stops. So it's very important for us to make sure that we see a continuous source of funding, or at least potential for the project to continuously be run, even when the funding runs out. Next is faculty barriers. This is especially for the higher leadership. So sometimes the teachers, they often feel they are not equipped to teach sustainability because they don't have the training, they don't have the time, they don't even have the resources to teach education. So something like what TMU is doing right now is actually very useful, because you equip the teachers with the necessary tools to implement the SDG education effectively. So because without faculty confidence, sustainability remains basically theoretical instead of mainstream. Fourthly, lack of measurement. Without data, schools cannot show whether their initiative actually worked. So there is basically no evidence, and there's no evidence, it means no accountability, and of course, the spirit of the students and the faculty members also dies with it. So measurement is not optional. It's actually the backbone of credibility. Fifthly, ignoring local context. Sometimes people do a copy-paste model, i.e. they see something is working in a particular country or in an international level, and they just copy-paste it into their institution. But sometimes it does not reflect the institution, or better yet, the students' realities. So, for instance, if you teach about polar bears to tropical students, i.e. to students in India or to Malaysia, we won't really understand the importance of polar bear. I mean, like, well, what's the significance of it? But if you teach about tigers or elephants, there's something that's more connected to the local context, and they'll be more inclined to protect their forests to be more sustainable. So students must see sustainability as connected to their daily lives and communities. And top-down preaching. Simply telling students that they need to be sustainable, it will not work. Students will always disengage when they feel that they're being lectured instead of being empowered. So credibility is lost if you just basically just tell students that they need to do something without actually giving them the tools to act it out. Not only that, the institutions themselves will lose their reputation if they themselves do not implement what they're teaching. Like, for instance, like I said, you're teaching recycling in the classroom, but you do not provide recycling bins in your institutions. That's when the institution loses credibility, because basically it's not walking the talk. It's all walk, no action. And that will create a system where students feel that action actually does not matter. Now, since like we already lack of time, I just would like to just briefly go through the other 17 case studies. As I can highlight to you that there is a case study for each of the 17 education, from poverty reduction to peace building. There's actually a sort of education for each of these SDG goals. So the broad perspective is that you can see the SDG education is not limited to one particular niche area, but it's relevant to every subject and discipline. But the same lesson applies. If you go through all these case studies, you will get the same lesson, which is firstly, whole institution integration, secondly, partnership, thirdly, student leadership, and fourth, and most importantly, data. You need data and feedback loops for these projects to be successful. So let's talk about the practical first steps, i.e. what we're going to do from what we learned from this lesson is firstly, start small. So you ask, well, why start small? But the most realistic thing you can do is can ask yourself, what can I do tomorrow? Because when you start small, as long as local and measurable, this actually builds confidence and momentum. So even the most modest of initiatives can actually show impact and inspire larger change. So my advice would be choose one relevant SDG, maybe an SDG that is directly connected to your institution or to your community needs. For instance, quality education, clean water, or even responsible construction. Then design a small, measurable project. So keep the scope limited but clear. And the measurement can be simple. For instance, if you're talking about quality of education, the measurable context can be the number of books read by the students, or the number of older students teaching younger students, or liters of water saved for responsible consumption. So the important thing is that it needs to be something that can be measured continuously. Then thirdly, you can either form or strengthen the existing eco club, i.e. green club. So this student club will integrate what they learn and also have clear responsibilities of what they need to do. Be it, for instance, like auditing, like data collection, awareness campaigns, or actually on the ground projects like planting trees and whatnot. But the important thing is that the club will give the students ownership and the tools to actually implement what they learn. And most importantly, give them leadership experience. So I would highlight that you need to collect results within 6 to 12 weeks, at most within 3 months, because shorter time frame keeps energy and enthusiasm high. If you keep it 6 or 1 year, people always say that it's something that's going to take a long time, so you don't need to do action today. But when it's short, they are more motivated that they need to do something today. So results can be tracked with very simple metrics, like for instance, the percentage of reduction in waste via recycling, the number of increase in student participation, or for instance, number of households adopting new habits like in the carbon dioxide leak in the Czech Republic. It doesn't need to be complex, but the data is important to show visible progress, to know that what you're doing actually works. And of course, use early win as inspiration. Make sure to share the results. Do not keep the results to yourself. Share the results with your institution website, social media, in your own personal social media. Share it with the colleagues, administrators, community. These kind of early wins actually motivates people that what they're doing actually matters, that people are celebrating their wins. So these small wins will actually create wider adoption, because people will see like they can also emulate these wins and they can also adopt these wins. And this can actually also secure not just NGO, but actually state and national level support. This is something that is actually we have personally experienced. So this creates a cycle of scaling up. Small pilot, bigger project, and to in the long run, institutional change and community adoption. So the takeaway message is small but concrete. A short-term measurable project that is a powerful way to show that you're actually taking change. So before I end today's presentation, I would like to just highlight one of the projects that I'm personally leading, and personally I'm very, I would say I'm personally very happy about. Is our Towards Zero Food Waste initiative in Bintulu. So it actually fits the local context, because Malaysia, unfortunately, is one of the worst offenders when it comes to food waste. We are one of the world's highest food waste generators per capita, the highest in Southeast Asia, and I think it's in the top 5 in the world. So that's why this is one reason why we wanted to address this problem, because it fits the local context. And also it's in line with SDG 12, which is responsible consumption and production. This goes back to what I told you, take global challenges and put it into the local context. Then how do we integrate to what I mentioned today? Firstly, there is a whole institution integration. All levels of the institution, be it from our highest administration all the way to the students, each and every one of them were involved in this project. They had their respective roles. Then we formed partnerships. This is actually a joint effort by ourselves, of course, UPMS, BDA, Bintulu Development Authority, which is the municipal government for Bintulu, and they are actually fully funding this project. And also Tokyo University of Agriculture, which is Tokyo Nodai. So we learned from Tokyo University, because the strategies that's being implemented in Japan regarding food waste reduction is frankly speaking, is one of the best in the world. So we learn from them and you fit it better into the local context. And of course, we also collaborate with food producers, be it restaurants, hotels, and schools, so that the changes actually happens on a institutional level for these respective small and large institutions. And also we gave student leadership. Each students had this respective role. They either engaged in the survey, they either engaged in data collection, and also in outreach. As you can see, one of the students on the bottom left picture, she was responsible for reducing the food waste in a local food bazaar. So she collected 201 kg of food waste, which was successfully converted into compost. So, and this, her personal action was reported in the newspapers, and most students will have already witnessed it, and they are starting to emulate it in their own respective communities and whatnot. And then of course, there was data and feedback loop. All the actions that we're doing, we have surveys and self-reporting, i.e. what actions is being done by the institutions, these respective organizations, how much of waste is being generated, how much is being reduced, how much is being composted, everything we are collecting. Also general awareness, so that we have a sense of continuity to see the progress from the first month that this project is implemented in January, all the way to next year, December, where this project will successfully complete. Hopefully by then, the actions that's being taught to these respective members of society will be continuously be done for the continuous future. I'm also proud to mention that this actually was reported in the centerfold of our local newspaper. So this actually, by this newspaper, I got approached by several different companies and institutions to educate their respective employees and into their organizations on how they can reduce their food waste. So sharing of knowledge creates partnerships and creates a sense that they too can do something that's impactful. So before I end, this is my final slide. Before I end today, I have one final call to action is choose one thing for this semester. Choose one thing that you can do. Don't overthink or wait for the perfect project. Just do the one thing that you think is the thing that you can do successfully. The most important thing is that, firstly, make it visible. Let others see that it's happening, whether it's on your notice board, classroom, or social media, because visibility inspires peers and creates momentum. Secondly, make it measurable. Make sure there is data where you can collect and actually show the progress, because that strengthens credibility and creates motivation. And thirdly, make it shareable. Make sure what you learn, what you're doing, can be shared with other colleagues, other students, or networks. Because by sharing, that's what drives institutional change. So instead of waiting for your leadership to change, you try to change them by your own actions. The most important thing to remember is that no matter how small the lesson from these cases is, that small beginnings can scale into lasting changes. Just like in Ghana, what they started in primary school has actually changed the sanitary and water consumption in these respective communities. So with that, I would like to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to talk and being such a great audience listening. I apologize if anything is unclear, but I would like to end today's presentation because it's sharp 6:30 here in Malaysia. So thank you very much. Back to you, Dr. Neha.
It was a highly informative session. The case study that you have shown us was highly full of fruitful insights. So I think the way you have brought all the stories of real world sustainability from the zero food waste initiative to digital circular economy model gave us powerful reminder that impact begins with the invention and intention. Your presentation beautifully demonstrated how education, research, and community engagement can come together to address some of the most pressing global challenges. Thank you so much, sir, for taking time from your busy schedule and taking us to the another world full of case studies and insightful tips. Thank you so much.